I took a pill in Ibiza to show Avicii I was cool.
Good afternoon, I'm Abe.
And I'm Frank. And today, we're adumbrating the second half of Unit 5 in Meyer's Psychology for AP textbook, States of Consciousness.
So let's get started.
All right, Abe, start us off.
Let's go. Let's talk about hypnosis. So hypnosis is defined as suggesting that certain thoughts, feelings, or behaviors will occur spontaneously. But the power of hypnosis lies in the subject's openness to suggestion, not in the hypnotist himself. The effectiveness of hypnosis depends on the subject's openness to suggestion. About 20% of people are highly hypnotizable, meaning you can convince them not to react to the repulsive smell of ammonia when a bottle of it is held under their nose. All in all, anyone can experience a degree of hypnosis. It is also important to note that age regression is impossible. Studies have found that age regression, or the ability to relive experiences from one's childhood, is not even possible with hypnosis. Now, Frank, tell me some common questions about hypnosis.
Well, Abe, there are a few. The first is, can hypnosis force people to act against their will? In other words, if I hypnotize you enough, Abe, would you enjoy making these videos? Well, experiments show that being hypnotized can't force people to harm others, and instead it's the test environment that causes people to act differently. The second question is, can hypnosis be therapeutic? Well, there's some evidence that it actually can be, and that's because therapeutic hypnosis relies on post-hypnotic suggestions, or suggestions made to a hypnotized person to be obeyed outside of the therapy session. This has been shown to help with most non-addictive medical problems. In other words, use of hypnosis if you're recovering from Ebola or Zika can actually be quite beneficial, but not if you're trying to recover from heroin or opium. The third question is, can hypnosis alleviate pain? And surprisingly, at least to me, the answer is yes, with 10% of people being so susceptible that they can actually undergo surgery without anesthesia if they've been hypnotized. These same people go on to recover faster and leave the hospital sooner. All right, Abe, now that we've learned and dispelled a couple myths about hypnosis, can you tell me more about the process in general?
I would love to. Let's explain the hypnotized state. The key idea here is that hypnosis demonstrates the power of social influence. The more you trust and like the hypnotist, the more likely you are to be hypnotized. So, since Frank is quite fond of me, I can hypnotize him whenever I don't feel like doing my APA homework.
Sad but true.
Exactly. Hypnosis also involves dissociation, and dissociation is a form of divided consciousness that permits certain thoughts and behaviors to occur simultaneously with others.
For example, if a hypnotized person drenches his arm in an ice bath, the hypnosis can dissociate the sensation of pain from the emotional suffering that causes the person to experience pain. Thus, the person's arm may feel cold, but it won't hurt. Frank, how do you feel?
I honestly can't feel much of anything at this point, Abe. We've had to do this video 5 times and my hand's kind of numb.
Looks like I'm not the best hypnotist.
Hypnotic pain relief may also be due to selective attention. Basically, hypnosis can prevent us from paying attention to pain stimuli, but it never blocks sensory input. The bottom line is that during hypnosis, the majority of our behavior occurs on autopilot, in that there is both a conscious and unconscious component. So Frank, we can obviously be manipulated by hypnosis, but is there anything else that can affect the way we behave?
There certainly is. While there is debate over the effect of hypnosis, no one can deny that psychoactive drugs can certainly alter perceptions and moods. How much so depends on tolerance. Essentially, the idea of tolerance is the more you do a drug or drink alcohol, the less effect it'll have. For example, we see Abe on the left in this screen, having 1 beer, and after that, he'll be quite tipsy. But on the right, we see Special Agent James Bond, finishing up his 12th martini of the day, after which he'll probably drink 12 more. The idea there is that Abe hasn't built up a tolerance, but James Bond certainly has.
A year of college can change you.
That is certainly true. The problem is there are a couple issues that the world and humans especially have with drugs. They can be so fun and so invigorating that people become dependent on them and experience withdrawal when they stop doing them. This can be as simple as the person who relies on coffee to kickstart their day to the crack addict who will literally kill to get high. This is because of the physical and psychological dependence created by addictive drugs. Overall, however, people who are addicted make up a small percentage of all drug users, as low as 15% for drugs as addictive as cocaine. Once you are addicted, feel free to take therapy to try to quit, but know that many quit on their own. Finally, some say that addiction can occur with any pleasurable activity, such as gambling, sex, or even eating. For the most part, this is just people blaming their behavior on addiction, although in some cases, such as internet use, it has physiological evidence to back it up. Abe, now that we know that we should never ever do drugs, can you tell me more about specific types?
I would love to. There are 3 types of psychoactive drugs which all affect the brain synapses. 1, depressants, 2, stimulants, and 3, hallucinogens. It's important to note that our expectations of how the drugs will affect us also have a large impact on what the drugs will actually do to us. First, we'll discuss depressants, which slow body functions and decrease neural activity. Alcohol is the most prominent example of depressant, so let's talk about its effects, but not before admiring this wonderful photo. Wow.
All Abe's idea.
The first of alcohol's effects is disinhibition, meaning that you're more likely to act on urges while you drink. For example, when Frank gets drunk, he can't help but to pull out his American pageant and start reading.
Again, sad but true.
Another effect is slow neural processing, which basically slows your reactions, and it's what makes driving under the influence dangerous. And a third effect is memory disruption. This has alcohol has long-term effects on the brain. And large amounts of alcohol contribute to the death of nerve cells and the production of new nerve cells. Alcohol makes it hard for your brain to produce new nerve cells. And interestingly enough, drinking can also shrink the brain.
So if you want a 5 on that AP test, don't drink every day.
Yes. Let's talk about the other effects of alcohol. The first of which is reduced self-awareness and self-control. Failures elicit drinking. If a stock you invested thousands of dollars in suddenly plummets in value, you'll be more prone to binge drinking. We know that drinking reduces self-control since most rapists are intoxicated when they commit their offense. Alcohol also affects expectancy. When people have an idea in their heads of how alcohol affects social behavior, they will act accordingly to that idea. So if I give Frank a drink, and Frank strongly believes that alcohol makes one more interested in American history, he might have an urge to read the American pageant after he drinks.
It's been known to happen.
Yes. And the last effect of alcohol is its sexual effects. Alcohol makes people more inclined to have sex. Drinking lowers sexual inhibitions, and people tend to find promiscuous others more appealing when they're drunk than when they're sober. There are 2 other types of depressants we will discuss: barbiturates and opiates. Barbiturates slow activity in the CNS and help with sleeping, so they're detrimental to memory and judgment, but they reduce anxiety. When combined with alcohol, they can be deadly. With opiates, they also slow neural functioning, but they result in blissful pleasure. However, if you consume an opiate repeatedly, your brain will stop producing endorphins and you will experience severe withdrawal. Heroin is a good example of an opiate, and you can just look at Nikki in Orange is the New Black for an example of what heroin can do to you. All right, Frank, now that we've talked about depressants, can you tell me about the second type of psychoactive drug?
I would be happy to. Let's talk about stimulants. Stimulants are drugs which excite a neural activity. Let's look at 5 of the most common. The first is methamphetamine. These give euphoria and heightened energy through dopamine release, but can lead to permanent depression if taken too much. The second type of stimulant that we'll discuss today is caffeine. This is the one that your parents probably take. Caffeine lasts for 3 to 4 hours and it essentially just kind of wakes you up. When you take it, 3 to 4 hours later, you'll start feeling drowsy, but if you take it too late in the day, it could stop you from going to sleep. The third type of stimulant we'll look at is nicotine, aka cigarettes or cigars. Most smokers start as teenagers whose peers or friend groups smoke also, and once addicted, it's very hard to quit. This is because nicotine is similar to other drugs such as cocaine and ecstasy in that it stimulates the release of dopamine. meaning that once you quit, you get that withdrawal because you're not getting that dopamine release, meaning it's extremely difficult. Fourth, there's cocaine. Cocaine highs are the quickest of all the drugs we'll talk about today, lasting only 20 to 30 minutes. And cocaine, as a subset of the amphetamine category, is extremely addictive. Again, because it causes your brain to release that dopamine that it would have otherwise stored up. Finally, there's ecstasy, also called Molly, both of which are normally made from pure MDMA, but are often diluted with anything from caffeine to baking powder. Ecstasy releases dopamine and stored serotonin, creating a feeling of intense euphoria for hours on end. The downside is that you're releasing the stored serotonin which otherwise would have been used at other times, meaning that if you take Molly or ecstasy too much, you'll end up with permanent depression, which can affect you for the rest of your life. Aside from the risk of permanent depression, there's one other side effect of abuse of ecstasy, and that's, oddly enough, severe dehydration, which can occur if you do ecstasy or Molly and then dance for the next 4 or 5 hours in a club without drinking enough water. And on that happy note, Abe, can you tell me a bit about hallucinogens, the final category of drug we'll talk about today?
Let's do it. So hallucinogens will distort your perceptions and cause sensory images. They're also known as psychedelics, and some examples are LSD and marijuana. LSD is similar to serotonin. You're going to experience a hallucination sequence when you're high on LSD. You're going to first see some geometric forms, then some more meaningful images, and then you're going to experience a sensation similar to being separated from your body. The sensation of LSD is very similar to a near-death experience, since both involve seeing bright lights and replaying old memories. Let's move on to marijuana. The active ingredient is THC. In this picture right here, Frank is demonstrating how to properly consume marijuana. Marijuana will relax you. It also causes disinhibition, intense happiness, and it amplifies your sense of taste, sound, smell, and color. There are, however, some negative effects.
Impossible.
No, marijuana impairs your coordination and reaction time, and it disrupts your formation of memories. And this formation of memories effect can last longer than just the period of smoking, and heavy smoking can shrink your brain. However, marijuana can also be therapeutic for anyone suffering from nausea or pain, since THC molecules can bind with the cannabinoid receptors in the brain.
Now, the bottom line with psychoactive drugs is that although they all have immediate positive effects, they also have negative effects, which will worsen as you repeatedly consume the drug. Jesus, Frank!
I tried, man. I tried. Anyway, thanks for watching.
Please like and subscribe.
And comment down below if you have any questions.
Catch you guys next time.